LEIGHTDICKEY.com. Do you have an event or occasion coming up that could use a special touch? Perhaps a wedding, a production, a show? Good! Then you're in luck. Hayley Moores is who you're looking for. Hayley is a makeup artist in the Toronto, Ontario area, specializing in bridal, glam, natural, and special effects. She's incredibly talented, professional, easy to work with, and has a personality that is second to none. To book Hayley Moores today, follow her on Instagram at mad_milash, that's MAD_MILASH, or email her at madmilash, again, that's MADMILASH @gmail.com. Book Hayley Moores today, you'll be glad you did. LEIGHTDICKEY.com. LEIGHTDICKEY.com. Do you find yourself reminiscing on what life was like when you were younger? Do your favorite songs, movies, and TV shows instantly take you back to a simpler time? Great! Then you're in the right place. Join me, Leigh Dickey, on my new web series and podcast, Yo Nostalgia, where I cover everything you grew up with. From films and toys to fads and trends, Yo Nostalgia has it all. Subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever podcasts are available. Follow along on social media at Yo Nostalgia Show to keep up on this time-traveling trip. Yo Nostalgia, breathing new life into your memories, available everywhere now. LEIGHTDICKEY.com. LEIGHTDICKEY.com. Do you enjoy good conversation? Are you a person with many passions? Perfect. Then the Beats and Speaks podcast is for you. Join me, Leigh Dickey, every Friday for stories and interviews about everyday life with everyday people about everyday things. Everyone has a story, and I just want to help them tell it. The Beats and Speaks podcast, your everyday life, everyday stories, everyday people, comedy and entertainment audio joyride. Subscribe and download on LEIGHTDICKEY.com, Leigh Dickey TV on YouTube, and your favorite podcast app. The Beats and Speaks podcast, available everywhere now. LEIGHTDICKEY.com. LEIGHTDICKEY.com. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Leigh Dickey here. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast, and a new episode in the Star Wars mini-series right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast. Yes, I know. It's been a while since I did a Star Wars-centric episode. I thought the mini-series was over. I thought I was done. But you know what? I figured we'd bring it back maybe for another episode or two. These mini-series will probably never truly be done, but from here on out, the episodes within these miniseries might be a little more sparse and far between. However, with this episode in the Star Wars miniseries right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast, I figured I would tell you why I decided to start and do a Star Wars miniseries right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast and within the Beats and Speaks podcast and with Leigh Dickey Media. But before I do that, before we get into the main event, before I tell you why I chose to do a Star Wars miniseries right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast, I figured I'll tell you where you can find the Beats and Speaks podcast. Of course, new episodes of the Beats and Speaks podcast are released every single Friday on my official website, LEIGHTDICKEY.com, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and wherever podcasts are available. Please do comment, like, share, and subscribe. Find us on YouTube as well under Leigh Dickey TV. Leave us reviews and rate us 5 stars too, if you would, please, and thank you. If you want to be a guest on a future episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast, have questions or comments, or just any topics that you want to discuss, send me an email at leightdickey@gmail.com. Follow along on social media as well at LeighTDickey. All right, now that all that housekeeping is out of the way, let's get into the main event. Let's get into Luke, I Am Your Podcast. Yes, that's why I started and chose to do a Star Wars miniseries right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast right now. All right, so yes, why I started a Star Wars miniseries right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast. And truthfully, I may have said it in earlier episodes, but the real germ of the idea or the brainchild of the idea, where all the brain power came from, was that I'm not the biggest Star Wars fan. I'm not a fan really at all of the Lucasfilm, now Disney-owned space western juggernaut. I'm not a fan of Star Wars. I don't know why. I just couldn't sort of, dig my heels in and grasp the enormity, or I couldn't grasp why Star Wars is so popular. And it was a way for me to sort of get out of my comfort zone. And that's pretty much the idea behind the Star Wars miniseries right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast. So it was something that I could do. I could interview fans or people or whoever wanted to talk to me about Star Wars and educate me more than I was or was not. It was just something I could do to get out of my comfort zone. Getting out of your comfort zone is always a fun thing to do, and it's always a good thing to do. Yes, it's scary. Don't get me wrong. Talking about Star Wars, I didn't want to come across like an idiot, but I know I have enough general knowledge of Star Wars and basically the surrounding universe to get me through a 20, 30, 40-minute interview, or however long these episodes ran. So, I knew that Star Wars had a rabid fan base. I knew that it was a wide fan base and that it was massively it was all over the place. It was all over the world. There's different parts to this Star Wars lore and the Star Wars universe. Like, I talked to Sam Ince of the Beta Network from Australia. I talked to Tom Klein from Off the Rails with Tom and Mark from Wisconsin, or Robert Solomon from Ohio from the This Uncanny Earth podcast. And perhaps my favorite interview of all, I talked to John Lester, aka Gamester81, formerly of the All Gen Gamers podcast and of YouTube fame. I think he's with CollectorVision now, and that was a massive get for me. I knew what a big Star Wars fan he was, and I really wanted to get John on the show, and that was amazing for me. Like, just to have him agree to do the show. It took a little time and it took a little finessing on both our parts, I think, with schedules and what have you, but I'm just glad it worked out. It was a fantastic interview. All the interviews that I had in the Star Wars miniseries were absolutely fantastic. So I thank all my guests: Tom Klein, Robert Solomon, Sam Ince, Alex Kirsch, and Tracy from Bare Naked ABCs. And there are just several episodes within the Star Wars miniseries. You guys can go check them out. They're in the archives at my official website, LEIGHTDICKEY.com, and on your favorite podcast app and player of choice. So again, doing the Star Wars miniseries was just a way for me to get outside of my comfort zone and talk about something that I really wasn't a fan of and that I really knew nothing about. I didn't understand why it was so popular. It was just something where I was like, why is this such the beast, and why is this such the massive, colossal thing that it is? I still don't get it. And to be quite honest with you, there is part of me there that is curious, because I know that John Lester and I, and even Robert Solomon and I, were talking a bit about the Mandalorian. I think Alex Kirsch brought a little bit of it up too. So there is part of me that is curious to check out the Mandalorian. I still haven't, as of this recording, and today is April 12th. This episode will probably go up sometime in July or August, but you guys will hear it, and hopefully at some point I will get around to watching the Mandalorian and giving you my thoughts, because I want to give you my impressions on the Mandalorian and of Star Wars, because I'm a total noob. I know next to nothing. I don't follow the lore or the canon or whatever George Lucas came up with or whatever Disney has managed to come up with. I know that, some of the films within the franchise are universally panned. They're not as well received, but some of them are. Like A New Hope, people love that one. Return of the Jedi, people really love Return of the Jedi. So, I guess it's sort of hot and cold. You take the good, you take the bad, you take everything in between. But doing this Star Wars miniseries has sort of opened my eyes and my ears to the fandom of Star Wars. And I've grown to have an appreciation for it. I'm not saying that I'm going to fall in love with it, because I never could have, and I've tried my entire life. I have tried in my entire 31 years of existence. I have tried to jump on board the Star Wars bandwagon. I had one of the games for the Nintendo 64 growing up, and my dad was like, "You know what? You're probably not going to like it, but I'll buy it for you anyway." And he was bang on the money. I didn't like it, and to this day, I haven't touched it in probably like 20 years. And I always thought that was kind of weird when he told me that, because I might have been like 9 or 10 when that came out. But I said, well, why would you think that? He's like, because you're a bigger Star Trek fan than you are Star Wars. And he's absolutely right, because I love Star Trek. Star Wars, not so much. And he was bang on the money, and I almost wish that I had listened to him back then, but hindsight's always 20/20. But he was, on the straight and narrow, and he knew me better than I knew myself at that point. And, he still knows me better than I know myself now. And that was kind of cool. I mean, like, I tried for years. I think when I was probably just in the last years of my preteens, or I might have been about 13 years old, I caught the last, say, about the last like 20 to 30 minutes of whatever Star Wars movie was out. It was either Phantom Menace or Revenge of the Sith, or was it Attack of the Clones? I think that was the one that came out in 2002. So it was either Episode 1 or the one that came after that. And it was just, I still didn't get it. I caught the last like 20 to 30 minutes by sneaking into a movie theater, by the way. And I don't know. I didn't get it. I didn't understand the appeal. There is part of me that still doesn't understand the appeal, but I understand that a lot of people love it. That's why it's made billions upon billions upon billions of dollars. And that's why it's made George Lucas this uberly wealthy man. So I can't really knock George Lucas for coming up with something that's been super successful over the last 43 years. I mean, they just keep pumping out films like it's nobody's business. They're pumping them out left, right, center, forwards, backwards, inside out, upside down, and then right side up, I hope. But it's fantastic. And I mean, good for them. And I'm thankful that Star Wars has the fan base that it does, because it gave me fantastic interviews for not only the miniseries on the Beats and Speaks podcast, but it gives me talking points. I have enough general knowledge of the franchise to get me through the interviews, as I said earlier. But it's just this sort of encompassing thing that I suppose provides escape, and has provided escape for millions upon millions of people, children, adults, whoever, over the decades that it's been around. And to be quite honest, I have an appreciation for it, but I probably will never love it as much as the millions upon millions of people that do. But I am appreciative of my guests from the Star Wars miniseries. I'm appreciative of the fans of the Star Wars, and that's just why I wanted to do this Star Wars miniseries, to try and understand why it's so popular, to try and understand why millions of people flock to theaters, buy the merchandise every single time something comes out that has Star Wars on it. I didn't understand it then. I'm starting to understand it more now that I've gone through the miniseries, but that's just why I decided to do a Star Wars miniseries right here on the Beats and Speaks podcast. But I want to thank you again for listening, tuning in to another brand new episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. I have been your host, LEIGHTDICKEY. This has been another episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. But this wraps it up for this week. We will see you and talk to you all next Friday for a brand new episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. Please do comment, like, share, and subscribe. Find us on YouTube under LEIGHTDICKEY TV, your favorite podcast app and player of choice, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever podcasts are available. Please do rate us 5 stars and leave us reviews too, if you would, please and thank you. If you have comments, questions, guest requests, or just want to get in touch with me and the show, follow along on social media at LEIGHTDICKEY. Send emails to LEIGHTDICKEY@gmail.com. But this has been another episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. I have been your host, LEIGHTDICKEY, And we will see you all and talk to you all next Friday for a brand new episode of the Beats and Speaks podcast. All right, I'm signing off. You all have a good one, and we'll talk to you soon. Peace. LEIGHTDICKEY.com